Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I rise simply to add a few words of support to this resolution for the government of Barbados to increase its capital with the Development Bank of Latin America and the Caribbean. We've been used to saying Latin American Development Bank, but I think that this nomenclature alone, the fact that we are now able to say the Development Bank of Latin America and the Caribbean, indicates to us a shift, indicates to us a movement in international multilateral diplomacy that is not just academic. That is not just academic. You know, sometimes we come to this honorable place and we say things like agreement for the subscription of common capital stock, and it sounds as if it's academic. It sounds as if it's esoteric. It sounds as if it is just some paperwork, some paper that is being pushed to be able to tick a box. But this is far from what this is. The work that the government of Barbados has done in the last 5 years outside of its physical borders has been substantive work, has been consequential work. And that work has been done in partnership with people who make decisions beyond these borders. And I'll say a bit about what I mean by that. There's so much that affects us that comes from outside. When I was studying economics, we were told that countries like ours are price takers. We were told that we have very little influence on international commodity prices. We have very little influence on global supply chains. We have very little influence on global value chains. We, as Barbadians, as a region, have been used to supplying bulk commodities. We have been used to cutting cane and making sugar and selling sugar. We have been used across this region to planting something and reaping something and selling that thing. That's not where the wealth is. That's not where the value is going to be created for our children, for future generations, to be able to be owners of capital in this region. And so one of the many things, the honorable member who introduced this resolution spoke about the bread and butter issues that confronted us, the mission critical things that we had to address as the government come into service in 2018 to get life back to the baseline. That was just the baseline, you know, that was the bare minimum. No sewage in the streets, I would say, is the bare minimum. You can't even say that's development, that's just the bare minimum. So we had to do some of those things to get back to the baseline of what it means to be a Barbadian, of what people understand about what it means to be a Barbadian. Buses available. No sewage in the streets, the sewage system working. Pensions being increased to be able to allow people to live. But as we were doing that, we had to make up for the fact that Barbados had been missing from international conversations for a decade. The Barbados that people look to, no matter, don't mind how small we are. This was a country that was always influential in international conversations about global trade and development. And for a decade, radio silence. But we are price takers. We are takers of many things. So unless we go and have conversations in the places and with the people who help make those decisions, we are not in anything. We just have to sit down here and wait and hope that whatever decisions are made without us there happen not to harm us. But guess what? Most of the time, when a decision is made in your name without you there, or without you having been able to weigh in, either by sending who you want to represent you, or by sending your own perspective, or by being there to share your own perspective, you end up at a disadvantage. I start here, sir, because this may seem like a simple resolution for a capital increase, but this is actually far more. The conversations that we were able to have with the Development Bank for Latin America and the Caribbean, that we were able to have in the with the Inter-American Development Bank, with the International Monetary Fund, with the World Bank, and I stress the World Bank because, to be frank, Barbados had graduated to this very strange position where, in essence, you are told, you are okay now, go off on your own, and there's no need for you, because you're middle income and 10 years ago, your gross domestic product was this amount, you're all right. Rather than looking at what are some of the challenges that countries like us face and being able to work with us to make sure there is always sustainable financing available. And don't get me wrong, sir. I do not believe in cap-in-hand diplomacy. I do not believe that we simply say, poor we, give us some money. But hear what? That has not been the approach of Barbados or of this government. The approach of this government and of the Honourable Member for St. Michael Northeast, the Honourable Prime Minister, and the team of people who have been having these conversations, the approach has been, actually, we know what is wrong with the international economic system because we've experienced it. We know, as a small, middle-income island state, the things that affect us, but we can also show you the innovations that we've been able to make, the things from which you, IMF, the things from which you, World Bank, the things from which you, CAF, should learn that we were able to do in Barbados. Have a look at this. Have a look at these natural disaster clauses that mean that if a hurricane hits Barbados, we don't have to pay principal or interest, in some cases, for 2 years, and we can actually spend on fixing the country. That was Barbados. We didn't wait for anybody to come and develop natural disaster clauses and say, here's what we've been doing for the last 2 decades. That was Barbados. And so, one of the reasons that we are here today, considering this resolution, is that the conversations that we've been having with institutions like CAF have been conversations that have been consequential for this country and for this region. It was on the basis of conversations with me when I was Minister in Economic Affairs and Investment and was able to make a presentation to the Inter-American Development Bank about what a natural disaster clause could look like as applied to their current systems and their current instruments. It was on the basis of that that they came back with a new instrument that said, listen, we've decided that we are going to create a principal payment option. That means that for 2 years you can suspend principal payments on IDB loans. That was on the basis of a conversation with the government of Barbados. It wasn't just our loans that it affected. It affected all of the loans of the Inter-American Development Bank because little Barbados had the temerity to make a suggestion about how IDB could improve its systems. We are not doing cap-in-hand multilateral diplomacy. We are having conversations as equals with our colleagues in the global international economic space. That is the reason that we have seen so many innovations and so many new things that are applying to how countries like Barbados are being treated in the international space. This is not esoteric, this is not academic, this is not because people like to write papers and ask for things to happen. The fact is that we've been able to strengthen, Barbados has been able to strengthen its relationship with this bank. And I want us to understand as well that when we talk about financing, when we talk about partnerships with multilateral organizations, we're not just talking about loans. We're talking oftentimes about grant financing. We're talking sometimes about guarantees so that if you're working with a third-party financier like a commercial bank and there may be issues with making funds available to the private sector by that commercial bank, there are options for multilateral banks to offer guarantees so that if that private sector company gets into trouble with that loan with that commercial bank, that there's a safety net there. There are all kinds of ways that partnerships with banks like CAF and IDB and the World Bank and others benefit the people of Barbados. But there are also all kinds of ways in which their partnership with us, they are the better. The region is the better. The world is the better for having these conversations. That's what real partnership looks like. The Resilience and Sustainability Fund of the International Monetary Fund was developed, I dare say, I don't know if the honorable member for Christchurch Essential would agree with me, but was developed, I dare say, on the basis of conversations between the highest levels of the fund and the Prime Minister of Barbados. So we don't just sit down and say, this is what we want, and we don't come with ideas for how to make it happen. The IMF, which was an institution that really was about balance of payments crisis, when a country gets in a position where it can't pay for anything, the IMF was set up to come in and bail it out. Simply financing support, balance of payment support, for the worst of times for a country. The IMF has now become a development institution. And I don't think that I would be exaggerating if I were to suggest that that has very much been strengthened by the relationship that the fund has had with this country and with others in the region. That fund that was established for climate support is not perfect, I would be the first to say, but often you don't start out perfect and you evolve. That fund that was established, the Resilience and Sustainability Trust, there is a reason that Barbados was, the second country to be able to access that. One of the reasons is that the conversations that we had with the fund put them in a position to be able to carve that out, to be able to establish that. And so all of that to say, sir, that when we see these kinds of resolutions and when we come to this place to do this kind of work, it is not box ticking. The Development Bank of Latin America and the Caribbean has had several financing operations with Barbados. And one of those has been something called the sector, two of those have been something called the sector-wide approach program. How did that come about? And I had the honor to be able to put that, to lead the setting up of that second SWAP, sector-wide approach program, or SWAP as we call it, for the transport sector. And one of the reasons that came about was because we had started out talking about a traditional investment loan where you have a set of activities and the bank tells you you have to do it in this way, and if you don't do it in this way, you don't get the next set of money. And we said to them, but here's the challenge that we're having. This thing is too tight for us. This thing is too prescriptive, and it's not going to work for us. We need to be able to have a sector-wide approach program that will allow us to do all kinds of things in the transport sector, not just fix roads, because the loan was supposed to be for fixing roads. We know that we want to be able to address culverts and bus stops and institutional strengthening of the agencies that deal with roads. We know that we want to put the Ministry of transport and works in a position to deliver roads better. We know that we're going to have to look at equipment packages. And that is the kind of relationship with the development bank. That is the kind of negotiation process. That is the kind of scope you have when you're able to strengthen your position in an institution like CAF, which is what this resolution allows you to do. I will say, and I think the people of St. Michael South Central would object to me sitting without pointing out the fact that the very reason that we got a sector-wide approach program for the transport sector for roads to be done was so that some of the small roads and community roads in places like Halls Road could be fixed. And I make the point repeatedly that urban communities, we see that highways and without prejudice to the works that are going on the East Coast, which need to be done, but you're talking about many kilometers of road in comparison to some of these urban roads where, Mr. Speaker, I don't need to tell you, of all people, where housing is tight, houses are close together, parking, for those who have been able to see a way to afford and own a vehicle, is almost impossible. The situation feels hectic. As our Jamaican sisters and brothers say, it feels hectic in some of these urban communities. If you could ease that feeling in these tiny roads that would give you such value for money, because you're not talking about kilometers and kilometers and miles of road. You're talking about small roads like Roberts Gap and Chase Gap and Train Line Road and Marlhole Road, where many, many, many people live. And I know the metrics that you look at, how many people drive through the road. I don't want to tell you how many people drive through Roberts Gap trying to get to town in the morning, sir. Traffic chock-a-block. As are potholes. And I only say that to make the point that the reason that we build in this flexibility into instruments like the sector-wide approach program for transport, the reason that I, as a member for St. Michael South Central, who also happened to be the minister responsible for this particular area of work, made sure that we had this approach to fixing roads was because I would leave St. Michael South Central in the morning and go in the ministry and go into conversations with the bank and understand that the issue that we were trying to fix was not just about how many people drive on the road. The issue that we try to fix when we address basic social infrastructure is people's standard of living and people's feeling that we care, that somebody cares, that you're not leaving them in the back of the credit union with a mash-up road because you only care about the road driving down the front of the credit union. So I don't know how to talk other than straight. But if I make the point that these conversations are not academic, that they are material to the standard of living of the people of Barbados, then they must be made to be material to the standard of living of the people of Barbados. We don't do the financial innovation that the member for Christchurch East Central talked about so that people can stay in the condition that they've always lived in. And if you talk about easing the situation in urban communities, if you talk about addressing the way that people live and the opportunities that they have, you can't do it halfway. Sir, I would say that we have had a lot of satisfaction with the way that the engagement that the government has had with CAF. I will also say that the reason that these conversations are so important is that right now, if you pick up any newspaper, read any blog or any journal that talks about global finance, what people are talking about is this idea of a new international economic order. What the Honorable Prime Minister continues to advance, as we did when we when we had conversations at the Climate Summit in Glasgow in 2021, is this idea that whatever the global financial institutions are doing, that is not working for us. In fact, that is not even working for them. That is not working for the world. And so this idea of a new international economic order, I'm not saying a new world order because I don't want the people who tend to hold on to conspiracy ideas to suggest that that's what we're here in Parliament debating. When people talk about a new international economic order, they're saying so because they realize that the balance of power is shifting from the traditional economic superpowers to others who have different kinds of influence. And we have to be a part of that conversation. But beyond this idea of the macro financing flows and how that is done, I think we have to go beneath that. I was asked recently to do some work with some global partners on this idea of a global green industrial policy. What does that look like? How do we get in shape? The macro level is necessary, is important. We need to get the financing and we need to have innovative instruments and so on. But a few layers down from that is how do you make it, these things that you're trying to do, reach actual people who have to work? What will it mean for jobs? What will it mean for whether we're really ready to completely transition to electric vehicles? What will it mean for whether we can actually get batteries for those electric vehicles when it's time to replace them? What will it mean? How will the global supply chain have to adjust, or how will we have to adjust to it to make sure that if we do manage to get the batteries for the electric vehicles to replace them, that the cost is not prohibitive? Let's continue to talk about the macro issues of finance, but let us please also talk about the defined work. Let us please also talk about what does this look like on the ground in Barbados and on the ground in Grenada, on the ground in the Bahamas, and on the ground in St. Lucia. The infrastructure to be able to move to being an energy secure country. And I say that one day after the country was powerless in more ways than one to be able to address these issues with its energy, its power supply, and availability of energy. And this is not just about reducing dependence on fossil fuels so that less is paid out of the treasury. This is also about energy independence, so that if I am able to have solar PV or some other form of energy, that I can materially benefit, so that issues of distribution are not also monopolized. What does an industrial policy for Barbados or for the region that takes into account this need to have this green transition, what does it look like materially? Will it really create jobs? Or do we have to look elsewhere for these jobs? And so these are the conversations that partnerships with institutions like CAF allow us to have. But just like we initiated the conversations on the macro financial issues, we have to initiate the conversation on this. We have to be able to say clearly where we stand on some of these energy issues, the nuts and bolts of it, not the big high-level plans. And that is what I hope is the next step of this conversation on global policy. Sir, as I close, I want to pick up on a point that was made by the honorable member who so ably introduced this resolution. On the matter of accountability and how we handle accountability. On the matter of how people feel about their government. the honorable member is perfectly right. That often, and this has been my experience, things are presented, and I make reference specifically to the Auditor General's report. The nature of the report, the way it is structured, the way we are accustomed to having it presented, is that it is quite factual. And so it does not allow too much for nuance. It does not allow too much for one to be able to say, well, this wasn't in column 7, but it was actually in column 8. It doesn't allow for that. The responsible thing to do, I believe, would be to report beyond the facts. Would be to say, we have found this discrepancy on the left. And when we consult with the agency on the right, we realize that the reason for this discrepancy is so and so. And for a long time, we've been saying, and I can't speak to how it has worked in the last year on the inside of the government machinery, but for some time we have said, if there are some discrepancies that are accounting issues, let us understand why. Let us understand whether this thing really was in column 8. It should have been in column 7, but you know, for goodness sake, that it was in column 8. Can you reflect that in the report? And so there's some of that happening. And I say that understanding that the Auditor General's report is structured in a particular way, and that individual has a duty to present what he has found. When I was minister responsible for the Barbados statistical, for the BSS, the organization that handles statistics, Barbados Statistical Service, one of the things I often used to say to members of the team there was, you can't just come and say unemployment is. You can't just come and say this is how prices have changed. This is the consumer price index. It has gone up or it has come down. One of the things that we have to be able to work with the Ministry of Economic Affairs and others to do is to explain what is behind the numbers. Now, people can believe it or not, but we are saying these are what the numbers say, and this is why. And often, you have to add that value to numbers. You have to add that value to what is going on in the ledgers, because it could look like nefarious activity when it is not. It could be nefarious activity, but it could also look like nefarious activity when it is not. And so I think that the Auditor General's report has to now evolve to the point where there is some explanation. I can't say on whose shoulders that would lie, arguably not the Auditor General's, but somebody's, to be able to add value to what is behind these numbers. But I also wonder how long we are going to say, well, we just have bad accounting practices. I also wonder whether we are not, this Barbados Party government has often, not always, I would be the first to say, not always, but has often made things look easy. Has often made it seem as if things happen just by clockwork, because it's like a duck. You look very calm on the surface, but you're paddling hard underwater to make things happen for the people of Barbados, right? And sometimes it gives the impression that this work is easy, and it is not. And I don't think, I think we realize that it is not. This government has done some tremendous things in a tremendous way. The Honorable Member for Christchurch East Central, the Honorable Member for Christchurch East Central talked about, he used a little bit of he corrected himself when he talked about interesting things, because we don't like to say interesting things when we're talking about accounting. That's always something else. But I think what he went on to explain and what he means was innovative things. Has done innovative things to make sure that even within some of the constraints that we faced, because we needed to on budget meet a certain deficit or surplus. And so the government was able to find other ways to finance what it had to do for the people of Barbados. And in so doing, was able to bring about things in a short space of time. Not perfectly, I mean, we know that. We know that things are not always going to go the first time around like you want them to go, and sometimes you have to stop and take stock and fix it. We know that, and I believe that this government has, in many cases, been able to do that. But having done such good work in many cases and continuing to do so for the people of Barbados, it is unfortunate that one would let accounting practices or an absence of action to bring things right cause the people of Barbados to doubt the intent and the level of responsibility and care that this government applies to its business on behalf of the people of Barbados. Put simply, what I'm trying to say is, this government has done too much, too well, to continue to lean on the crutch of quote-unquote poor accounting practices. We undermine ourselves when we do not simply face the matter and fix it. How long are we going to talk about cash versus accrual? And I beg the honorable member for Christchurch Essential that if I am wrong and if I'm out of date because of my current position, to bring me up to speed. But I say that honestly from a place of disappointment, because this government has been able to achieve both here domestically and globally so much. We cannot continue to allow an Auditor General's report that is constrained in its structure to report things in a particular way to cast doubt on the good intent and the honest work of this government. A government that has done far more, I dare say, than any other to be able to practice and demonstrate fiscal responsibility after one that had no association with the idea. It is time to be able to put this behind us and to say we are putting the resources. I'm sure the honorable member could go to the same CAF to get the technical assistance and to get the expertise. We are putting the resources into fixing whatever is stopping us from being able to truly represent what the government of Barbados is doing. All the innovation, the fact that we're being able to crowd in more private finance to do the things that are going to benefit people and give them jobs like the ones at Sam Lord's. Let us deal with this situation once and for all. I find it personally and professionally frustrating, because the same people with whom we sit around these tables globally are seeing those reports. They're not knowing, they don't understand, or they might not read between the lines to understand that it was in column 8 when it was supposed to be in column 7. Let us do the work to make sure that we are not just doing the right things as we are, but we are seen to be and proven to be doing the right things in the way that they need to be done. With those words, sir, I support this resolution, and I thank you for indulging me.